Call to order tonight's meeting. Would you please take a moment of silent prayer, please, and certainly include the people of Texas. Amen. Please stand and join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We've got everybody here, but we're going to dispense with formalities of the normal board meeting because this is just a budget hearing from our lovely CSFO, Chief School Financial Officer, Ms. Tina Hancock. What we'll do is listen to her presentation, and we'll follow up with any kind of board discussion, any kind of public interaction after that, or any questions that you might have for her. Tina?
Thank you, Board. I'm pleased to bring to you tonight the 2018 proposed budget. We're pleased to present not just a balanced budget, but a positive balanced budget. This is the first original budget that has been presented in Hoover City Schools for over 13 years. So we're very pleased with that, with everyone's hard work where they've been very diligent in their spending. The budgeting process typically begins in the spring with school and department staff meetings where we begin looking at or determining the staffing for the upcoming year. Staffing is, we try to complete that by mid-April, but as you can see from the different board agendas, that's still been ongoing all summer as it typically is. But as far as this budget, and it's typical of Hoover City budgets, 82% of our general fund budget is determined at the time that we do staffing. So that is where 82% of our budget is spent, is in our people. Principal and department heads also submit a budget for non-payroll expenditures for their areas of responsibility. Budgets for federal programs are completed throughout the summer as we receive information about that funding. The budgeting process is designed to develop for the school system a tool to plan for the use of financial resources that will best serve the needs of the current student body. The annual budget is determined using an analytical, strategic estimate of projected expenditures. And I know for the audience this may be a little difficult to see, but it is in your packet. This is just the general information of the projected enrollment by school and the number of administrators and teachers at those schools. The number of our local school units that are paid locally through local funds are 217 at this time. The information you see here is what we will typically present to the state. It's just, we call it the B1 or the budget summary report. What I wanted you to see as we lay this out, this is where you see where, we have a positive budget, as you can see in the green, that is circled there for you, that it is a positive budget. But I kind of wanted to lay out or explain the different columns here. This is also how the financials are laid out, so they follow the same format. Your first column is your general fund, and that is those funds that are not necessarily restricted. Those are our local taxes, state funds, foundation funding. Then our second column is special revenue. That is the public funds at the local school and the federal programs and the child nutrition. The third column, debt service, is basically just that. It is debt. Capital projects, again, is as stated, it is for capital projects and capital outlay as well as fleet renewal. The fiduciary expendable trust column is restricted to booster and support organizations. Those are the non-public funds. And then you have your total column. So those areas that I've outlined for you that are restricted funds, those follow different guidelines, and those are restricted to certain types of expenditures. And I wanted to also point out to you on the general fund, the state typically looks at whether you have a 1 month's reserve. They look at just that general fund column. As you can see, it's the third line from the bottom, excess revenues and other sources. We are positive $1.4 million to the good, not just a balanced budget, but to the good. And you can see we are a positive budget all the way across, and our total positive budget is $3.3 million. This is just a breakdown of the different columns, kind of puts it all more in a little bit better format. But our total revenues that we expect to receive this year is $174 million. The expenditures that we are planning for is $171 million. The other fund sources or uses, if it's in parentheses, it is uses of fund, and those typically involve pass-through, and indirect cost pass-through is based upon a state mandated legislative action in 1993 dealing with child nutrition, and indirect cost is what your federal programs pay for using our facilities. So that's in that column. Then you have that bottom line, excess revenues and sources over or under expenditure. So that's where we either have a positive balance or a negative balance, and this year we are pleased to present to you a positive balance at $3.3 million. This is a comparison from the 2017, the last budget amendment that we presented to the board. The first line shows the projected ending balance that we presented in that budget amendment that we expect to have at the end of this current fiscal year as of October 1. And we expect it to end total $93 million. With the proposed budget that we are presenting with 2018 in comparison, we are expecting to increase that amount by the $3.3 million to $96.8 million. This comparison is comparison to the 2017 original budget that was first presented at this time last year. The first line shows the revenues over under expenditures, and again, as I said, this was the original budget presented in 2017. You can see that we projected a negative budget in the general fund of 1.8 with a total negative budget of 1.9. You know, when we compare that to what we are presenting today with the proposed budget, we will have a positive general fund of 1.4 and a total positive budget of 3.3. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the first original budget in over 13 years that reflects a positive balance. Total budgeted revenues, as I mentioned earlier, total $174 million. This is the breakdown of the different funds. The majority of that, as you can see, is the general fund, where we receive foundation, our local taxes, and some other state funds. This is just a graphical representation of those percentages. As you can see, 80% of those revenues come from the general fund, and then 10% is from special revenue, then debt and capital projects. Revenues by source. These are the different sources, state, federal, local, and other that total the 174, and that is also laid out in your budget summary report. And again, when you look at the graphical representation of that, 54% of our revenues come from local sources and 41% from state. So as you can see, Hoover would not be possible without those local resources that we have. We have a historical representation here of a comparison of revenue to enrollment. In 2008, we had 12,397 students, and we were spending $13,715 per student at that time. You know, as you can see, we've had some dips in that with all the different things that have happened, the proration that we had back, starting in 2008. We have started to recover, as you can see, starting with 2016 and heading back up the curve. But at this point, with this proposed budget, we are at 3,947 students, and we are spending $12,504. So we are slowly creeping back up to where we were as what we were spending per student.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
On that expenditure per student back in, say, 2008, does that include capital expenditures as well?
It does. It basically, you take your total budget. And as I want to say, let me go back to that. Let me point out too here, when you compare this to the state or the average across the state, as we all know, Hoover is much higher than that. So, but we are still trying to get back to where we were as what we spend per student. This is what we received from the State Department of Education. It's on their state website, but it is the allocations that we receive based upon what is our ADM, or average daily membership of students. So we had a change of 26.75 students between 2017 and 2018. As you can see, as you look at the different categories, we gained from last year 5.37 teaching units based upon that growth. And this is basically the state allocation in terms of money. We see the largest growth in fringe benefits, which continues to increase, and they also increased some of these classroom instructional supply money this year. So we actually saw a gain of 3.2 million. But if you will look at the line second from the bottom where it says local funds, we have to provide a 10 mil match to the foundation in order to participate in that foundation program. We have to participate through our local taxes on the foundation side and also on the capital outlay side. If you will notice, there was an increase of that of $1 million. So most of that growth from where the foundation grew is coming from local sources where we have to provide a match to that foundation. Yes, sir.
Back on page 14, average daily membership increased to 26 3/4 students. We talked earlier that number is way the heck up now. And so we get 5 units funded from the state because that's what it was at the time we took the number. And now we're having to pick up the slack on all the other teacher units and other ancillary expenses associated with another 130 students.
Yeah, we're always a year behind.
Yes.
Ron, do you mind just taking a moment and sharing about the 2 additional teachers in A because of our growth being a bit quicker than we anticipated?
Yeah, we have been watching that on a daily basis, and we had projected this year about 175 additional students to enroll since past the start of school. Really, I was looking at that starting after Labor Day. We're already 150 into that 175 in terms of going forward. So we are seeing higher numbers this year than at the start of school than we have for the last several years, as that graph indicated. So it is starting to pick up. Construction has been picking up accordingly. Numbers are starting to come in.
We've already had to acquire 2 additional teaching units and an A or
Yes.
supplement that, even though you sprinkle those students out in all grade levels in various schools.
I believe, to be specific, 1A at Bluff Park, a teacher at Gwynn, and a teacher at Green Valley. And we'll continue to monitor that for growth.
Sure. As I was mentioning about the local fund match with the to the foundation, as our tax, they base this based upon our tax revenues. As those tax revenues increase, so does that match. So that shows there that is why that match increased by $1 million. Some of the other highlights that are in the general fund of state funding that we receive from the state: school nurses, technology coordinator, transportation operations, fleet renewal, capital purchase, at-risk, and career tech operations and maintenance. You will see that we had a large decrease in transportation operations of $306,000, which was definitely felt, and we of course have to pick that up with local expenditures. So those total state funds had an overall deficit amount from last year of $272,000.
On the transportation, we always are underfunded for buses.
Yes.
Buses, always. And does this reflect the fact that we postponed the purchase of bus units to this year, or are we really further behind than 300,000?
No, basically what we did in this current fiscal year is we went ahead, because you can only spend that fleet renewal, because you buy your buses with your fleet renewal, you can only spend that for either the bus debt or purchase of buses. And since we've been holding on to that, once those buses start to get older, and if they're older than 10 years, we no longer get funding for those. So we went ahead this year, and you guys, it was reflected in some of the agendas where we were approving buses and bus bids, that we did go ahead and spend that, not typically all of it, but we did spend that down to try to get those numbers back up. So we are still working on that. As you will see reflected in this budget, we did budget all of fleet renewal for the purchase of buses so that we can hopefully start to get every bus funded again.
Y'all do a great job of transportation, even though fuel prices are lower. I mean, it's hard to catch up when you're underfunded. Year in and year out, you're still growing.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the major program revenues within the general fund, as I've just mentioned, were the foundation. That includes the state and local match, which amounts to 77 million, local of 56 million, and transportation, ARI, or Alabama Reading Initiative, state nurse program, at-risk, national board certified teachers. And let me just point out real quickly, with the national certified, board certified teachers, that basically is money in and money right back out, because that pays for those supplements that the state provides. Yes, sir.
ARI, where's that headed?
It's good right now, kind of on the patient is, being monitored.
Still recovering.
But not out of the ICU yet, I think, politically, but I'm glad it's being given new breath of air. It was basically underfunded and undersupported at the state level for so long, so, you know, it was a very good program, and glad to see it, given the opportunity to thrive again.
So we've got, how many instructors funded by ARI? Alabama Reading Initiative,
Yeah.
6.
6.
6. It's important, like, you know, and the state has considered, and the governor, who's no longer there anymore, the ex-governor wanted to do away with it. We did away with him, but we'd like to mention something to you, city council front door fees. Our city has been very generous this year and has stepped up. We have a couple of council members here. We appreciate the support from our city. I mean, it's very felt here, so thank you.
I think it's probably a good place too, Ron, to talk just briefly about the $8 million deficit that the State Department of Education is looking at and what the residual impact might be on our school district, if any. But when the State Department has an $8 million deficit, you can be certain it'll be felt in our schools. For example, we do not do dibbles. But just recently, the cost to purchase the dibbles testing, which had been paid for by the state, that support has been withdrawn, and all those school districts that give dibbles have now had to come up out of their coffers to pay for it. So I just want to bring that in as a point of that $8 million somewhere probably is going to have an impact somehow, some way that we don't know yet, perhaps.
Is it your feel that this will be the Robin Hood approach at the state level to take from the rich and give to the poor? To recover the $8 million?
I don't know.
I mean, that's kind of the thing that you've been sort of talking about from time to time, kind of the undertone, I guess, for a while.
Well, you see by what Ms. Hancock's gone over, we exceed state funding substantially. Our community funds with ad valorem taxes and city revenues by far more than the state foundation program does. We're a little bit in fear that from Montgomery, they may decide that some of the less fortunate districts might need some of our money. I don't know how any more simple to put that, but that's, Robin Hood's a good way to put it. So we've made it known that that's not fair to us. We're contributing not only State Department funding, we get more from the state because the overall values of our homes and property is more, plus we have local funding. So we all work hard, we're proud of our city and our school district, so we'll fight that till as long as we can.
A recap of the general fund local revenues that we received: Jefferson County 22.1 mills, Shelby County the 22 mills, the Hoover City 24 mills. We also received some Medicaid reimbursement, E-rate reimbursement, some interest revenue, which has significantly gone up this past year as we invested $50 million, and so that has helped that. Again, we appreciate the City Council providing us with an allocation, including the front door fees, which is an increase up to $5 million, and then our county sales tax is 1.5. I just want to point out too, at the Hoover City, the 24 mills, even though I've reflected that in the general fund local revenues, not all that stays in the general fund. We pledge that debt or that money for the debt or for our bond payment. So you will see that reflected actually in the revenues for the debt, but I wanted to show how much we actually do receive as a total from those revenues. We also, will anticipate a $9 million, due to the refunding of the Jefferson County warrants. We have not received those funds. Currently, this budget does not reflect those funds, but we will be doing a budget amendment to reflect those funds once we receive that income. For the proposed general fund budget, this just basically breaks it down by category, the different expenditures, instruction and instructional support. You can see the majority of the budget is spent there, to a total $135 million. And again, let me restate that 82% of our budgeted expenditures are in salaries and benefits. And this is just a graphical representation of that. Again, 80% of our expenditures are devoted to instruction.
Well, under the administrative category, what all does that include? Does that include principals, assistant principals,
It does.
staff?
Instruction does. Yes, sir. That includes your librarians, your counselors, your special ed, some of your special ed. So for our instructional support category, as I mentioned, the total expenditures were $107 million. I did not, this is kind of a state representation, but I only counted classroom teachers here, not those librarians, counselors, and administrators. You could try to tie it back to that number at the beginning. This is just classroom instruction, those teachers that are actually in the classroom with students. So we have budgeted salaries and benefits, which include the supplements, which I will cover in just a moment, of $101 million. So you can see that, again, the majority of our budget goes toward salaries and benefits. And also this budget includes $38,000 to shore up some salaries. The operations and maintenance budget, we have budgeted $16 million. We currently have 39 maintenance employees with 93 custodial, which I find to be a little small considering the vast buildings that we have and how many people that probably would take to take care of those buildings. But we have worked well to reduce that budget, and we've made that happen. So again, salaries and benefits are budgeted at $6.6 million. This category also includes all of our utilities. So it may look a little inflated that we're spending that much, but this also includes our utilities of $5 million. The transportation, as we were just talking about, we budgeted expenditures. This is just the transportation operations budget, not the fleet renewal. This, we have budgeted $6.8 million. As we did mention about the buses are currently this year funded at $6,344. Well, we know from the previous board meetings where we've approved bids that a bus costs $80,000 to $90,000. So if you're not getting funded for a bus that's more than 10 years old, you're losing some revenue, but again, you're still not getting the full funding. And it was actually cut this year by about $40 per bus, which we had always been told in the past few years we're going to increase that. We're going to keep increasing it, but this year they actually did cut that about $40 per bus. Again, salaries and fringes or benefits are budgeted at 5.8, so the majority of that. And thankfully, with the fuel and costs going down, we were able to cut that budget a little bit. Supplements, what we have currently budgeted for supplements is a total of $2.9 million. As I mentioned, National Board Teachers, that is a supplement that the state provides. They do provide that $700,000 allocation, but we just turn right around and give that back to those people that earn those certifications. So for the general fund expenditures, we have budgeted, or general administrative expenditures, we budgeted $3.5 million. I wanted to just break down what each of these, you may see these, what each of these mean. The Board of Education services are attorney's fees, general board travel, association dues and fees, and some insurances. The executive admin services are the superintendent, assistant superintendent, receptionist, superintendent assistants, salaries, travel, professional development, some office supplies, because each department actually carries some of that category, and some dues and fees. The business support services are the financial salaries, the auditing, accounting software, office supplies, travel, dues, fees, and insurance. And in that budget this year, we have allocated some money for a new time and attendance software, which we will have to replace the time clocks. But as we look over time, that new software will save us $100 million on the maintenance agreement per year.
So it was how much?
100,000. Yeah. Oh, did I say 100 million? I'm sorry. Sorry. I wish.
You're too close to it.
Yeah. And then our system-wide support services, that includes our IT, human resources, public relations, the different softwares that they all use, travel, and different dues and fees that they may require. And that is basically all of the general fund column. And so let's talk about the special revenue. As I mentioned, these have specific guidelines and limitations on how you can spend this, and this column also includes those public school funds that are at the local schools. So some of our major revenue sources in this column are Title I, the different federal funds, IDEBA is special education, that was one of our largest, is 2.4. Then our child nutrition program at 6.5 million, and local school accounts at 6.7 million. You can see that the child nutrition, of course, would necessarily be one of our largest revenues. So here you will see the different breakdown of that in just a graphic representation, but our local school public funds represent 38% of that, and then our CMP also represents 38%. And within that, some of our major federal programs are Title I. We received $1.1 million in allocation this year. As you can see, most of that was in salary and benefits. The IDEBA, or special ed, we received 2.4. Again, you can see that the majority of that is budgeted to salaries and benefits, and those are actual teachers in the classroom interacting with those students. And let me point out, as we reflected on our last board meeting, the special education contracts, we continue to look at those contracts and try to renegotiate better prices on those. For the child nutrition program, I just broke the revenues down by some of the different USDA categories, and then what we received locally from food service income. And that was a total of 6.7. This child nutrition program also receives, which is listed as your other column, or your other line item when you look at that budget summary report, transfers from the general fund, otherwise known as pass-through. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that is based upon a 1993 state-mandated legislative act, and we pay that back to the child nutrition fund of 2.5 million. Yes, sir.
That's coming out of our general fund, passing back to CMP.
Yes, yes.
On the major federal program expenditures, salary of things, let's say, for example, Title I, is that include the director who's responsible for Title I?
No, that's just teachers.
Okay.
That's just teachers. There is a very small percentage that is allowed, because again, these are restricted funds and they only allow a very small percentage of that to be used there. So graphically, you can see that our USDA programs provide the majority of our income at 27%, and the other representation is our local sales at 43% in the child nutrition program. Those expenditures in the child nutrition program total $8.8 million. As you can see, the majority of that is for labor and food. Food costs continue to go up, but as Ms. Bonner has done an excellent job on trying to find better resources for us. She was joined a purchasing co-op, which allows us better prices with better options. And we've received feedback from the schools how much better those options are and how pleased they are. Also, with our labor costs, we continue to look at staffing needs and try to decrease those in attrition as we can. So with those expenditures, of course, 54% is going to be labor, and then 35% is going to be your food. Our debt, we have three debts: the 2005 bond, the 2010 bond, and the 2012 bond, all for building new buildings. So our total debt balance at this point is $168 million. Our FY18 payment will be $11.8 million. And let me just refresh everybody's memory that we refunded the 2005 bond in April, which will save us over the course of the life of that bond over $1 million in interest. And the call date of the 2010 bond will be in 2020, and so working to look at those actual rates and see if at that time, as we get closer to that payment, if we are gonna be able to refund that and hopefully decrease that interest as well. Our capital projects fund, as I mentioned earlier, this also includes a capital match from the general fund of 1.4 million. But the total overall revenue for that and allocation plus the local match is 2.9 million, and then we receive fleet renewal of 475. And again, fleet renewal, all we receive is 475 because we're not getting every bus funded. So again, we're trying to budget that expense, all of it, to the purchase of more buses. For the capital projects plan, these are some of the things that we have looked at that are some of the needs that we are putting in the capital projects plan that will be reflected on the 5-year plan. We've mentioned this to include the principal's input at admin meetings and shared this with, of course, the board. And so these are the items that we see that need to be addressed that are coming from the capital plan. Now, again, we have a maintenance budget that we're going to try to meet some of those less expensive needs there. And that totals $2.9 million. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, John.
Excellent.
Any questions from the board?
I have
Yeah.
a question. Going back to buses,
Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question on capacity. Like, what do we look like right now with our growing enrollment? And, is this something that we need to look at down the road? Will rezoning change? Or do you foresee us needing additional buses?
We have looked at that and we've talked about that again. That was another reason we went ahead and budgeted that whole fleet renewal out to purchase buses to try to meet those needs head on and of course increase our funding for later years. But yes, we are hopeful that we can meet those definitely for this year, but coming down the road, we're gonna have to start looking at that, yes.
And our capacity right now, is it?
Jerry, what? I can't remember.
For the student growth we're experiencing, we may have to have 2 or 3 routes, but it will be less than 5. It's not gonna be anything.
Is the ridership on the increase or?
Yes, sir, it is. It actually is.
Anyone else? Joe? Okay. Good job. No question.
I know that the buses, last year we had some problems at the very beginning, but this year it's been just smooth as far as, the students, the number of students, and last year was kind of crowded. Speaking from Russet Woods, which takes that way.
Yes.
Any questions from the public? Anybody have any questions or any points of clarification needed? A lot of hard work, Dina, thank you. A lot of hard work from faculty and staff.
Yeah, this did not take place, and I forgot to mention one thing, is I wanted to just mention that discretionary funds were basically the same as they were last year. We did not decrease that or increase that, it's the same that, it's not necessarily the same that the local schools are gonna get, but it's based on the same, those teacher units, but the amount per teacher unit will remain the same. And they'll still get that this year as well. But yes, this took, every department head was involved, every principal was involved in this. I did not do this. This took a lot of people. All I did was compile the information, but most everybody, everybody does their own budget and they take care of that budget, they watch that budget and they try to stay within that budget, And so it takes a lot of people, and I just wanna mention real quickly, my compiling this information is not just me. I have a wonderful, wonderful staff that I think I've told some of you how much I appreciate them, but I have Michelle McKay, Director of Finance. I have Teresa Meadows, who is one of our staff accountants and works with the local schools. Lane Levette, who is our after-school bookkeeper and accounts payable. And then we have payroll, Steve Marshall, who is our Director of Payroll. And working with his team is also Elizabeth Ray, Leslie Polk, Sharon McCall, and Sharon Tucker. This takes everybody, every department, and then everybody definitely on my team.
I'm always reminding myself to say, this is a working document. This document is not cast in stone. It is a best guess estimate from the beginning. We've already got opportunities at Spain Park and the gym floor, as an example.
Exactly.
We've got a new school we're in the process of fully acquiring now, and we're gonna do some great things there, so it's a process of evolution, but a great start, thank you.
Well, please allow me just the point of privilege to thank our staff, and Tina's being exceptionally modest, terrific work on her part and the part of her department. And as she shared, lots of people, all department directors, supervisors, principals giving us input. So this budget is reflective of a huge team effort with input from principal leadership and certainly central office. So it takes that person to pull it all together, and that's Tina and her department. We're grateful. So thank you for the privilege.
Well, you're being modest too, because the thing that it really reflects in my mind is that all your people are coming together to do what they can for the areas of responsibility they are accountable for. You know, facilities lease. What a nightmare that's been. But we now know what it costs to occupy a square foot gym space in the middle of the night, you know? And so it's those things that make this place operate more efficiently, and more efficient than it is, the more we can lean on Mike Shaw for money, you know, and it's just, because he does a good job.
I think that it's also important for us to be just an ounce celebratory about the fact, for the first time in 13 years, the school district, it has a budget where we're not spending more than the revenue coming to us. And that instead of that approximate $10 million deficit, you're looking at 3.3. Less spent than revenue coming into us, and that has not come without angst and pain and difficulties. And I think if you look at people in the room everyone's department has taken a bit of a hit, it has been hard. But I think it's also been important for us to own this budget and to understand that in our personal lives we don't spend more than we make, or we shouldn't, right? And likewise, we want to be thoughtful about our taxpayer money. So.
I'm just glad you didn't say we're here to make Hoover great again. Arnold.
Any possibility of the slide presentation being made available?
Yes, we will make that available. Actually, we typically will post that on the website, and I'll have Jason do that.
That can post this evening, can it? So we'll have that up for you.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments, blessings, curses?
Personal privilege. I see Mr. Stephen Presley's here, so took how many months to come back and give us advice? Thank you for that.
Well, the reason he didn't notice he was here, he's a mere shadow of his former self. He looked so trim and so good. He looked, I mean, awesome. You really look good. Okay, anyone else? Okay, nothing else. We're adjourned to the next hearing. Thanks. Hey.